Hey YouTube, Vsecure here. Today I wanted to go over some basic switch configurations. So when working with switches, there are some basic things that can be done to make working with them easier. Something that go into a template and be placed on all switches. So in this video, I want to cover some of those most common configs that should be on all switches to make your life as a network engineer, administrator, whatever, easier. Now the first command is a global config command, and it's just to change the name of the switch. So let's go into global config, and the command is hostname, and I'm just going to be generic on mine and just say switch 1. Now that command will set the hostname for the switch, obviously, so it isn't just IOU or whatever your switch says. Now when the command is entered, you'll notice that the name changes on the command line as well, so let's switch to here. Alright, the next command I'm actually going to do on switch 4. So the next command will be configuring for setting up a management IP on the switch. So this will be used to allow remote management of the switch through either Telnet, shouldn't do that, or SSH, should do that one. With switches, there are two common ways of setting up a management IP, using a loopback IP or a management VLAN. Now, if a switch is using IPs everywhere, I mean, it has multiple layer 3 connections, its preferred approach would be to use a loopback. So, like I said, I'll configure loopback here on switch 4. Now, this is also done in global config mode, and the command is interface loopback and then a number. I'm just going to use 0. And then we add an IP address. So I'm going to do IP address 10.10.101.1. And now you could do this as a host route, so it's a /32, or /24, whatever you want to do. Generally it's used as a host route, so I'm just going to keep it as a host route. Now when setting these networks, make sure the subnet is dedicated for this. And like I said, generally host routes are /32s. Also, while using loopback, the IP address will have to be advertised through a routing protocol to gain access to the switch. So in my case, what I might do is I will create a static route to it. 1.1.2. So we'll see if we can connect to that. And look at that. It works. Now the next approach would be to configure a management VLAN. So we'll need to have a VLAN assigned. In my case, I'm going to use VLAN 100. So we'll do that here on switch 1. Interface VLAN 100. And then we give the switch an IP address. One thing I'm going to do is make this the gateway for all the other switches, since this is my layer 3 switch anyway, or my distribution type switch. Interface VLAN 100 IP address 10.10.100.1, and since this is going to be management for multiple switches, I'm going to use a /24. Now one thing you'll notice is I created the layer 3 interface, but I did not create the layer 2 interface yet. So we gotta always make sure when you're creating your management VLAN, you create the layer 2 VLAN part as well. Alright, and now the interface should come up. And we can actually... Oh, also, since this is going to be trunked to all of our other switches, we have to include it on the trunks. So I'm going to do that using the interface range command, because this is going to be connecting to 2 other switches. And here, remember, when you always add it, you use the add command. Otherwise, you're going to remove all your previous VLANs that are in this allowed list and just have the one. So always make sure you have that add command there. Alright, so I have to quickly do that to the other two switches. So let's hop on switch 2. I'm going to create my interface VLAN. I'm going to assign it an IP address. Oops. And then we will have to create our layer 2 VLAN. And then also add it to the trunk. So add it here. Add 100. And then finally we'll do it on our last switch. Give it the IP address .3. Make sure to no shut it. And then we will create our layer 2 VLAN. And then we will add it to our trunk. And I like using the range command just to make things a little faster. And now let's go back to switch 1. So first thing we'll do is we'll ping ourselves. Let's see if we can ping our neighboring switches. And we can. Just make sure we can do 3. Which we can. But one thing you may have noticed I haven't done, before we do that, I'll show you what I mean. Let's pull up one of our other hosts here. And let's try, let me assign it an IP. Give it the, oh, I forgot, these don't need the address command, that's a Cisco type command. There we go. So, make sure it's working, we'll quickly ping the gateway. And it's working. And let's ping the local switches management VLAN IP, and we can. Let's see if we can ping switch 2. As you can see here, it's not working. So one thing that I haven't mentioned yet that we have to make sure we do on all of our access type switches is either, if it's a layer 2 switch, so let's see if this is a layer 1 or layer 2. As you can see here, there's no IP route, so this is just a layer 2 switch. We have to use the command IP default gateway 10.10.100.1. So that just sets, like it says, a default gateway. I don't know if it shows up yet. It does not show up here. But let's check now on switch 3. Here, this should be a layer 3 switch. It is. So here we can create a default route. So we send anything to 10.10.100.1. So now if I use that same command, do show IP route, we see we have this gateway of last resort. The static right here. So now if we try pinging our switch 2, it should come up in a moment. There it is. From switch 2, let's just ping switch 3. And we can. So now, let's try pinging the management VLAN. And now it's working. So, we have to make sure we always set either the default gateway or a default route on our access type layer 2, layer 3 switches. We didn't have to here because this was kind of our distribution. This is where all of our subnets live. We have more, like the /24 VLAN 10 lives here. So we didn't have to on this switch, but all the other ones we would. Alright, now that we have connectivity, the IP set, we can configure the switch to allow remote access. So we'll begin by configuring Telnet. Now, Telnet should be the last option to use as it is a unsecure and sends all information unencrypted. First, we want to configure the VTY lines. So line VTY 04, and this is in global config mode. So that will configure the 5 VTY lines. Some switches will have more lines, so you may need to check your switch model. And then the best way to do that would be to use like the command do show, well not, show run section line. And here you can see I have 0 through 4. So that will give you the count of how many lines you have for your VTY. And then we then want to tell the switch to allow local logins. So we will use the login local command. So this will have the switch check the local database for username and passwords. So we need to then configure a local username and password. And this is also a global config command. So we're going to do username. I'm just going to use Cisco, and then password Cisco. Now we could do that, but password is also a very unsecure or insecure. So we actually want to use the command, which is the preferred command, secret. And we'll use just a password of Cisco, 123. Now, the method that should be used, like I said, is the secret command, as this will hash the password, and it won't be visible by using any of the show run commands or able to do a reverse lookup of it. Alright, now the switch can be logged into using Telnet for remote management. We would prefer to use SSH, as that encrypts the traffic between the switch and the workstation. However, to configure the switch to use SSH, we need to generate an Rsa key on the switch, as it will need its own certificate. To generate the switch, we can use the following command. And this is in global config mode. Crypto key generate RSA modulus whatever number. I did minimum do a 1024. And you could use label and give it a name. This will generate a cert with the key length of 1024 in my case, or 2048 with that label. If you configure your switch with a domain, which, we'll do. IP domain name, we'll just call it hq.local. Now we don't actually need to use that label command. The label is there just in case you don't have a domain name set. But since I just set one, we don't need to. So let me type that command out again. Generate RSA modulus. I'll just do 1024. There. And now we have an RSA key. So now we can tell the switch to use SSH version 2. So it's IP SSH version 2. And now if we want to tell the switch to only use SSH, we can. So let's go back to line VTY04. And then the command to say just use SSH is transport input SSH. So now we can only connect to the switch through SSH. Alright. Just another couple commands that are helpful would be for helping maintain your switch, is to set the clock. Set maybe a local time zone, and maybe even daylight savings if it's used. So let's do that. We're going to go back into global config mode, and the command for that would be clock time zone, and then your zone. So I will use EST, and then you have to set the offset with UTC. So that -5, and then enter. And then if you want to set daylight savings, it's clock summertime, and then your daylight savings, so Eastern daylight savings time, and then recurring. So, like I said, where the zone is the time zone, like it could be Eastern Time, Central Time, Pacific, Mountain, but you have to make sure you have the offset, like -5 or -6, 7, for the previous time zones. And then for the daylight savings, it's, EDT, CDT, etc. And then to verify, we can actually do show clock. And there it is. It's now in Eastern Time, the time right now. So that is some of the basic configs that can be done to make your life a little easier, setting a name, setting time, giving yourself remote access to your switch. So thanks for listening, and next week we'll get back into a little bit more difficult configurations. All right, thanks.